Devaluation, victim or volunteer. The devaluation. People often regard this as one complete stage that follows the glorious seduction of the golden period. It's in fact made up of several parts. Sometimes there is the stranger period at the beginning, and it's so called because to you it seems like you're dealing with somebody completely different to the person that you know and love. This is when the transition occurs between the seduction and the insidious abuse of the sustained devaluation that is just around the corner. This stranger period should be regarded as the calm before the storm, and if you are among the few who recognize it when it happens, it is a clear signal and that you need to get out. Most, of course, don't recognize it and therefore remain incumbent. They perhaps see it as the relationship moving beyond the honeymoon period, and since there is no horrible treatment per se, rather it is a cooling off, a bit of distance, they do not realize that the stranger period, which is still a stark contrast to the golden period, is in fact a warning. The stranger period is at the beginning of the period of devaluation and is a clear marker that there are far worse times ahead. Thereafter comes a sustained devaluation, and dependent upon the type of narcissist you are dealing with, the relevant subschool, what else is going on in the fuel matrix, what else is occurring in terms of fuel levels, the nature of the sustained devaluation will vary, from silent treatments to physical violence, to word salads, withdrawal, invalidation, false contrition, the revision of history, destruction of property, controlling you through finances, bombarding you with false accusations, intimidation, bullying, bringing up the past, hijacking conversations, so on and so forth. And during the sustained devaluation period, there will of course be respite periods before you're plunged back into the sustained devaluation again. When there is the move from golden period to stranger period, you are unlikely to query this shift to any great extent. Should you have done so? Should you have paid greater attention to the narcissist, just as we always demanded? Should you have wondered why we didn't answer your telephone call with the enthusiasm that we once did? Ought you to have questioned why we seemed less interested in doing things with you? Did you perhaps see it, but instead mistakenly put it down to us being tired? Maybe you just thought it was because we had had a rough day at work. You asked if we were okay, and we assured you that we were. But there was no conviction in our responses. They were flat and otherworldly. But you didn't press any further. Why not? Perhaps you should have done. Perhaps if you had done so, you would have taken greater heed of what it was signifying. Or was it asking too much of you to realize what was actually coming? Nobody has any idea of what this stranger period signifies when they first encounter it. So why would you be any different? Perhaps the view that you fail to heed this warning is actually a harsh one. What then of the devaluation proper, the unpleasant behaviour when the darkness descended and the abuse really came? Of course, it is the false default setting of our kind, that everything is your fault. That is the way that we have been created. That is the way that we conduct ourselves in order to protect our necessity of asserting control. The fragility that arises from those threats which manifest repeatedly through your behaviour. We must project blame shift and remain unaccountable, whilst ensuring that you are regarded as culpable, liable and blameworthy. It is part of the assertion of control that is necessary to apply against you. Yet, if one strips away this all too readily applied blame, what then? Would the objective observer reach the conclusion of victim or volunteer? What do you think? Do not think that this is one of our standard exercises attributing blame. I've already conceded that such blame shifting is one of our key manipulations. But I'm lifting that usual approach and posing the question as to whether during devaluation you might be regarded as a victim or a volunteer. The first time that we doled out a silent treatment which lasted a day, should you have known then what you were dealing with and removed yourself, or is that unrealistic? What about when there was the second period of being frozen out? Or the third? Maybe not after those. After all, you dealt with them, didn't you? Perhaps then you ought to have realised when we lost our temper with you over what appeared to be nothing. What about when those savage words and insults were shouted at you? That is emotional violence. That is abusive. Why didn't you walk away then? You stayed. Could it then be argued that you volunteered for more dressings down? How about when we began to gaslight you? We toyed with your reality, confusing you and bewildering you. Did you recognise then what was going on? You're clever, aren't you? Resourceful and independent. Surely you knew what was happening. Besides, all of this was taking place alongside the shouting matches and the cold shoulders. Surely the alarm bells were ringing by now, weren't they? Did you hear them and ignore them, or did you just not hear them? What about the times when we took your car without asking, ate the food that you set aside, stopped you sleeping properly by elbowing you all night? What about the repeated stopping out late and the flirtation with other women or men? Surely you noticed all of that. In fact, we know you did, because we made sure that you did, able to control you and gain our precious fuel. So you experienced all of this, and yet you still stayed. Does that make you a volunteer to the abuse which continued? What about the first time we shoved you back during an argument? No? How about the second time, when that shove sent you into a wall and you banged your head? No? Surely then, when that first slap stung your cheek, then you must have realised what was happening, and yet you stayed after that. Does that make you no longer a victim, but a volunteer instead? Of course, nobody ever asked to be treated that way. You're not volunteers in that sense. But given that you must have realised that certain behaviours towards you were wrong, unpleasant and downright nasty, you saw them, you spotted them, and yet you remained, didn't you, and allowed yourself to be subjected to even more. You are your own person. Surely, you should have realised and walked away. You might refer to not being able to because of money, housing, accommodation and children. Perhaps they are considerations. When pitted, however, against your own safety and sanity, what should actually be protected first? Accordingly, reflecting on all that happened to you, the repeated manipulative and abusive behaviours, which were never isolated examples, but were rather repeated, habitual, a pattern, a set of increasing violations against you. You experienced all of this, yet are you a victim? Or did you in fact volunteer for this by remaining in the firing line? I would suggest to you this. To volunteer is to be able to exercise a degree of decision-making control over your own person. That means an informed decision. You were never allowed to make an informed decision because we never let you. We never made you understand truly what you were dealing with. Furthermore, all of this presents the following, doesn't it? It just shows how powerful the effect of emotional thinking is generated by the addiction to the narcissist. The very fact, as I have invited you to reflect and consider upon your situation, to see how an argument could be created, that you saw all of these things happening, you experienced them all, and yet you remained. You did nothing. Or you tried to do certain things, but not effectively so. And therefore, one would create an argument that you must have volunteered if you didn't get out. But of course, the reason that you didn't was because, one, you were not truly aware of what you were dealing with, and therefore you could not make an informed decision. And secondly, you were not able to properly see what was going on because of the obscuring effects of the emotional thinking. And the purpose of this video, in getting you to consider the question of being a victim or volunteer during devaluation, is to get you to realise just how powerful that emotional thinking is, and how you must guard against it. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.